Hey guys, too, right before we get started with this, I just have to put a trigger warning. We will be talking about some graphic things. We are talking about graphic issues. We're talking about Epstein level things in our backyard. So please be aware. You can always speed through it. But I'm just going to say this. You want to understand why the Savior weeps. You want to understand why he looks down on the earth and suffers. You understand why he bled at every pore. It's because he didn't look away. It's because he didn't turn away from the pain of his children. It's because when our kids were being hurt and tortured, he didn't look away because it was too hard. He went and rescued and sat and suffered and wept with them. And while the trigger warning's there, I believe it is important. There's a reason my heart fights for these people, for these brave warriors. It's because I've paid the price to suffer with them. And I would encourage you to suffer, to sit with them so that you can earn the right to sit with them in the Savior in the next life and understand his pain for them. And welcome back to We Are the People. This is your host, Jason Preston, and very thankful for all of you who are listeners, supporters, subscribers, for all the support you've been giving. It has been an incredible journey for all of us as we have slowly walked down this road that really started with the first two Shadows of Power episodes we did regarding the Hamblins and how that story rocked our world a few years ago when we shared it. We were threatened with a lawsuit a little over a year ago to take that down, which we refused to do. And then from that point forward, we realized if this is real, if this type of ritual abuse is happening, what could possibly be more important? And of course, the more we've talked to survivors, the more we have come to firmly believe without a shadow of a doubt that this is happening in our backyard. And one of the things that really has become concerning to me is that when all of the Epstein files have started to come to light, when it has become very clear to many of us that this nation is being led by pedophiles who are raping, abusing, torturing children, including clearly satanic worship and rituals. How is it we can trust these people who refuse on both sides of the aisle, who refuse to investigate it, who protect each other? How do we support people like this who are leading this country and this state when we know that they know this stuff is happening and they are covering it up, and yet they want to drag us into war? They want no accountability, and yet if we don't pay our taxes to them, we get arrested. But yet they're getting away with the most heinous crimes and refusing to hold anyone accountable. Here in Utah, this is, we've shared with you the Glenn Pace memo. We've shared story after story after story. Our law enforcement has acknowledged that satanic ritual abuse is real. Our legislators have acknowledged this is real. And yet we have these apologists who are out doing nothing but trying to dismiss and trying to sweep this under the rug. Well, we refuse to sit silently. We know this is real, and we know that this is the defining moment of our time. There is no greater issue if these things are real, that we are finding out about Epstein, if children are being tortured and hurt, if the adversary is running unchecked, what matters more than standing and fighting this? And instead of fighting and trying to protect these children, we have people in this state who are more focused on protecting the reputation of our leaders. And to me, that is unacceptable. And, as we start today's show, one of the scriptures when I was a missionary that we used to talk about and helping people, especially as we talked about the Book of Mormon, we used to read 2 Corinthians 13:1. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. And I thought that was powerful. I think God does that. I think we are held accountable. God doesn't just give one witness, but he gives witness after witness. And we have tried to bring a cloud of witnesses to testify of the reality of the darkness that is in our own backyard. Today we're going to be talking about another witness. If you go back and remember, we talked about some of the tragedies and abuse and horrific things that were happening in Riverton, shared by Michelle. Well, as we have continued down this journey, we've had survivor after survivor reach out to us, including a survivor that actually was in the same neighborhood, same organization, same cult, I guess, as Michelle. She knew Michelle. Michelle was 10 years older than her. Michelle actually, and I'll let her tell the story, but it's a fascinating story. I'd like to introduce to you an incredible woman who we have been able to get to know, named Gina Pemberton. Gina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. I'm excited to be here, and just a little bit about why I did this, mostly because I promised myself that if there was ever a platform that would be willing to produce our story, and I'm talking about our story as my sisters and Michelle, that I would courageously join in that and take my stand on that platform. And so even though Michelle's not here, I'd like people to visualize that she and I are standing side by side, as we have many times in the last, 10, 15, maybe it's been like 16 years since she and I reconnected. So I want to let everybody know that I am a firm believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is through faith and prayer that Michelle and I were reconnected, and promptings that I received one night as I was kneeling down to pray, the thought came to me, stop what you're doing right now and go change your name on Facebook back to your maiden name, to Pemberton. And so I immediately did that. And as I was uploading, changing my name, I had this impression, upload a photo of yourself in third grade. I had a friend that had gotten these class pictures, and I was able to put that picture up there. And within 24 hours, Michelle found my Facebook profile and posted a comment on that picture. And it became the very first witness to me that Heavenly Father had heard prayers that we had said when we were little children, scared and afraid and alone. And she and I began our journey together of healing, forgiveness for parents and relatives that dragged us through this hell, and forgiveness for each other for misery that we caused each other, and the power of Jesus Christ carried us through, and it's still to this day. I learned because of the rituals that there is a demonic force. There are people who really truly worship Lucifer, and that children like myself and Michelle were protected, spiritually protected in that warfare. There's a spiritual death that I watched happen to others, and I know that we felt angels. And that was one of the stories that she and I have shared, was seeing angels protecting our spirits from being damaged by these demonic forces. And that, through that thread of light, I want to share my story with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting because, right now, as we as an audience listen to Gina, she and Michelle have become very close friends. But when you first met Michelle was 10 years older than you.
And I moved into Bluffdale and met her probably for the second time. I believe that our paths crossed in the Masonic Temple when I was a little child, probably 4 years old, and Michelle would have been 14.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things about this type of abuse is that they train you from the time you are very young to abuse, abuse. And so that's one of the things that to me brings great credibility is you have these survivors that come on. They're not just saying, oh, I was abused and I'm a victim, but they're also saying, look, I also was participating in this thing. And just beautiful that, that what started off in great darkness in your life and Michelle's life, the two of you have been able to come out as honestly true warriors and stand and defy these wicked people who've sought to destroy your souls literally. And so I want to get in your short bit, but first I'd like to talk about this, because one of the things I hear some of these detractors, again, the thing that really hurts my heart is there's no question this stuff is going on. All someone has to do is look what's happening to Epstein. And just a few years back, these survivors were coming out and saying this was happening in Epstein, and the media and our politicians and news anchors would say, oh, this is false memory. Don't listen to these people. They're crazy. You can't trust them. But now we find out they were all right. And I think one of the things that's been beautiful on our show is to meet incredible people, Gina, like yourself, who are not crazy, who are actually very normal and who are very intelligent. And so why don't we start with this? Tell us, who is Gina today? Because we're going to hear your incredible story. We're going to hear everything, you've been through. You've seen the depths of hell. But who is Gina today? And what does your life look like on the outside?
Well, my life on the outside, I'm a professional artist. I have my art licensed on a lot of products. So if you shop at stores, you might find gift bags, greeting cards, jigsaw puzzles, all licensed under the name Gina Jane. I'm also a mother of 4. I am a grandmother of 10. I have served in my community in various capacities. I've served in the church. I was a young women's president. I've served every position in primary except for president. I've been a temple worker. I have lived a life of devotion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I have had to stand, like, I call it a tightrope walk of balancing my faith in Jesus Christ and being loyal to Jesus Christ and what I know to be true, and having to deal with the frontmen, the hitmen that I refer to as Curtin and McConkie. So in a nutshell, I am Gina the warrior. I am Gina the survivor, and I am writing a book. I'm working on a book, probably a series of books about my life and some of the experiences, and hopefully it will be fun and interesting, and also, diving deep into some of the pain that created who I am, because without it, I wouldn't have become the person that I am. I feel like I have deep, deep faith, and that's still where I stand. I stand on the faith of Jesus Christ. I am not currently attending any of the wards of the church, on the advice of an FBI agent that told me that he's struggling with his role in investigating this and asked me to pray. He's LDS, he's active, and I felt very strongly that I should stop attending, and I quit attending last June, and I'm living under the radar.
Yeah, well, bless you. And, I assume most people who know you, without knowing your backstory, they see Gina, this very successful person.
Yeah.
And yet people who only know your story see, something like, is that hard for people to wrap their head around?
I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around. And I've had, I've done licensing contracts and I've taught online courses, and I've had people that I've worked with just say, if you ever go public with your backstory, we may have to cancel your contract with us because we don't want our product to be tied to your past. As though I am so tragically flawed by what other people did. And I feel like what happened to me was somebody else's cloak of disguise, and their entourage of demonic followers and people that are today in high places. Most of them have passed away. But to me, I am not the product of their wickedness. I am the product of my faith in Jesus Christ, who saved me then, who saves me now, and who is my light. And that is who I'm faithful and loyal to above anything else. His name is above all names.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you. And by the way, Alexia wanted to be here. She was really excited to be a part of this. our life's been very stressful, as people can imagine. And so she's very disappointed she would not be able to make it today. But I can tell you this, she will be very envious when she sees your hair. She has literally got her hair done today to look very similar to how yours looks. So, so you look great.
Great, thank you. I just dyed my hair red, right? We just talked.
Alexia's been working on getting there. Well, it looks great. And so thank you for joining us, and especially at great risk. And I just appreciate, all the survivors, because, it feels like it's almost all risk, because you get mocked, especially right now. There's such this online LDS community that is just focused on doing one thing, which is discrediting and survivors and protecting the reputation of the church, instead of saying, hey, this is clearly something going on. Let's focus on getting to the bottom of it. Let's focus on protecting kids. But yet all these people want to do is attack survivors and mock them. And even they're now attacking Glenn Pace for what he did. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of our incredible viewers and audience and people who are in the comments who are standing with survivors, who are standing for truth. Because as she shares her story today, as you share your story, the beautiful thing is it helps people realize where we are in the battle of good and evil, that it is raging, and that behind the veneer, behind the beautiful all is well in Zion, the church outside building, and where everyone's wearing smiles and ties and everyone looks picture perfect, there is a darkness that is rotting and cankering underneath the surface, in the shadows of these mountains. And the greatest, the thing the enemy wants the most is for us to be naive zombies who are just walking around and not knowing the other side of reality, that we live in this world that has been created for us, that everything's safe and all of our politicians we can trust, and it's all left versus right. And here in Utah, there is no evil. It's Happy Valley. When in reality, darkness is raging, children are suffering. And this is our chance to stand and fight against the darkness. And when we have incredible survivors, like Gina, and like so many of those have come on and shared their testimonies, they do it at great risk. There is no benefit. There is no upside except for standing for truth and standing with God. And so, Gina, thank you for coming. And now, if you wouldn't mind, please share with our audience your story.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Before I met Michelle, as a little child, my earliest memories of being trained in any kind of ritual took place in the Midvale Chapel that sits at 87 East and 7100 South near State Street.
Is this the chapel on the left that we're looking at?
Yes, so the picture, there's the chapel on the left. The house that I grew up in until I was 8 and moved to Bluffdale sits at 175 East Carlson Avenue, which is the house that I remember the most in my earliest memories. And my older sister, was there, and my younger sister, and then we had a baby brother. We were all born close to a year apart in age, so very close. And my older sister began to be trained and trafficked before I was. I can remember her being taken. I remember her talking about feeling sick, and like she said, I feel like I'm walking in a bubble. I can remember being taken to I call him Dr. Allred. Dr. Rulon Allred had an office in Murray, and my mother met him. He was the chiropractor that took care of her when she had a fall when she was pregnant with my younger brother. So 2 years before, my younger brother's 2 years younger than me. So when she was seeing him, I was probably 2 years old. And it was shortly after that I can remember the first training. It was after we were in dance. So my sisters and I took dance classes, and we learned like I'm a Little Teapot and the Hokey Pokey, and did little dance reviews. And those first recitals were held on the stage in that chapel. And so the picture on the screen with me in the little blue dress, that's me when I started kindergarten. So that would be older than I was when this training first started. And so we would go to the chapel at night. There was an outside staircase, And I believe there's a photo that shows that outside staircase of the Midvale Chapel. We would go in through the back door at nighttime, down the stairs from the exterior. At the time, we could walk through the neighborhood. They have closed off the access sidewalk that went from a side street that from our house, literally, we walked around the block and came up through the neighbor's side yard and crossed into the back of the church, and we could directly go down those stairs. And there would be several people there. I recognized one of them as being in the bishopric. As a little child, I remember sitting in sacrament meeting and looking up at the stand and realizing that the person to my left, which would have been the person to the bishop's right, was in the rituals.
So the first counselor.
Yeah, so the counselor, and then there were other people involved in these rituals that I don't know exactly who they were, but I recognize, different ones from different activities, like a mother-daughter relief society. One of the women got up, and I thought, oh, she looks like one of the ladies that I saw in the ritual, and it was a counselor in the Relief Society presidency. And as a child, I didn't know that, but I had to stop really and look back and try to make sense of it. And around the time that I began to focus on making sense of this, I was almost 8 years old and still in that ward. So the rituals that we practiced basically was to learn to stand in a circle. I brought a little demonstration thing. I don't know if this will fit on the camera. So this is kind of how I learned, was a clock. And that we would stand at our spot on the clock. So 12 girls, and then we would stand. And so I typically stood on 9 or 10, depending on who was in the ritual. We would walk into this ritual circle by entering and walking, I believe, counterclockwise. So the first girl would walk in and walk all the way to 12, and we would load that circle and stop on our number. And so we lined up by age, by the oldest to the youngest, and in sets of sisters. And so I believe, now that I look back, and it's only been the last 2 weeks that I've really put this together, is that we learned a particular ritual that would be presented and utilized in various locations. So literally, we were performing a ritual that I called the black and white, or the clockwork ritual. And that was something that we learned to do, and it was like learning a dance routine. There was a timing and a pace and code words that I can't recall. That candles on the floor, we were handed candles, which became Michelle's role. We had to direct the girls on the order to stand. She would line us up, and this is after, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that was the role that Michelle and my older sister would learn to do, would be to direct the group of girls. And she was not ever abusive to me. I want to say that right out of the gate. There's a lot of guilt and shame that we carry that's unnecessary guilt. And I carried this until after my kids were teenagers, and I finally went to therapy after talking with my sisters, confronting my parents, the whole 9 yards. I finally had to go to therapy to help process my feelings of guilt and shame. And so, yeah, we had to walk in these circles. The chanting would start. Men would come in, and they would load the circle behind us and around us. So now we have an inner circle of girls dressed in white. I think they made these capes out of sheets. They cut slits to put our hand through. When I went to the temple for the first time, I was totally triggered by putting on the white shield that they wear in the initiatory and had a panic attack. I felt like there was going to be blood coming out of my throat, right, when we were doing the endowment, and they had the old signs and penalties, which were later taken away because so many women have reported to the church that this was triggering. And so the church slowly has greatly altered the endowment session. So back to my childhood, walking in this circle, we had nothing on underneath. We would come into the basement, change out of our street clothes. We would dress in these gowns. One of the women that would help supervise that was this counselor in the Relief Society presidency. I remember that my mother was home. She often didn't come to the rituals, but she did sew the clothing that we wore. And we were being trafficked at the Hotel Utah at the same time. So we had little white dresses that we wore for that, and little, white gloves and lace ankle socks and black Mary Jane shoes. But we were using similar code words to get us to be triggered to do what we had been, I believe, drugged and hypnotized to do. So back to the ritual, there's an inner circle and an outer circle. The men have loaded the circle walking a clockwise direction, and then they were placed at the points on, it could be a compass, north, south, east, west, it could be a clock, depending on where we were performing and what we were going to do. The head of that circle was always the prominent person that was kind of the commander, the leader, the person that would call down Lucifer, call down demons, and the goal was that these men would be possessed. Sometimes they had women behind them. Sometimes those women were their wives. Talking with my sister, she said Ingrid, the woman that was our handler at the Hotel Utah, would have been my dad's coven wife for some of the performances that we did on stages, for example, in the Masonic Temple. So we learned to walk. Someone would start chanting, and then the movement would begin. The girls would all step counterclockwise. So I'm stepping from like 10 or 9 heading towards 6, and the men are moving in the opposite direction and then would stop on a certain point. And then more chanting would happen. Words I don't remember would be said. And then someone would come in. There would be a 13th person. Sometimes there would be 15 total. So there might be 3 adult men or women, sometimes men and women, standing to the top of the circle at like 10, 11, 12 o'clock in that circle. And then they would come through. My therapist told me, "You're describing breaking the circle." And I said, yeah, they would break into the circle and then start doing something on a person that was on an altar-like table, or, I've seen it done on a hospital gurney with wheels and tarps all on the floor. I've seen this ritual done on a table that had been, brought into the space. And I've seen adults, and I've seen children, and I've seen infants. I've seen black and white. I've seen Native Americans sacrificially killed, dismembered, organs removed, the burning of organs. Sometimes they would cut out their heart and pump the blood into a chalice and pass it around the circle, and all the men held it up, praised Satan, drank the blood, and the girls would change places with the men, and the men would stand in their black robes. They reminded me of black robes worn by judges, black robes worn at graduations, and that has always triggered me to see the memories would come back even as a little child. Anytime I saw someone at a restaurant walk in their graduation gown with a black robe on, I would have a flashback. And so when people say, oh, you had buried memories, false memory, if I have false memory, then every memory that I've ever had triggered by a basement stairwell coming in from the outside of a building, a chimney burning on top of a church, or a smokestack of a school, or at any commercial building, I have had those flashbacks and the repeat of these ritual circles, the burning of organs, the chanting to Satan, and then in the middle of all of that, the memory of angels comforting me, sometimes lifting my spirit. They say, oh, that's dissociative disorder. I believe it is the atonement of Jesus Christ, that children are alive in Christ because we were spiritually saved by him, so that we were not subjected to being ripped apart spiritually, and we were kept whole and complete in that power from heaven. And it's one of the things that Michelle and I have agreed on. That was one of the things that made me feel so grounded, was her remembering experiences like that. In the darkest moments, the brightest light came shining. And if all of my memories are false, then my memory of Jesus Christ and the holy angels and the Holy Ghost would be false as well.
Wow.
Sorry, I got a little
Oh, that's
bit
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And maybe I'll share this while you're regrouping is, and that's one of the things that really hurts me when I hear people trying to discredit this and say, well, why are they saying, why are some of these things similar? well, why is there so much similarity within the Christian religion? You know, there is a God, and there are certain ways we worship him. We take the sacrament. We have baptisms. We have ordinances. There is patterns that you can find throughout Christian religions. And it's, and you know, Gina, just as much, I am with you, just as much as I know that God lives, that there is, that we have a Savior who died on the cross and is resurrected. I know that there is also an enemy to him. There is an opposition, and he has ordinances. He has patterns that have been going on through the dawn of time, in which people worship him. And so, of course, there's similarities between stories, because they are worshiping the same evil, the same father of lies. So, of course, you know, and this is why I hope our listeners can appreciate this.
Yes, and I, you know, as a little child, when we went to the Masonic Temple, I was probably 4 or 5 years old.
This is the Salt Lake Masonic Temple?
Yes, so the Salt Lake Masonic Temple, and I believe Michelle was there. She and I toured the Masonic Temple after we met. She suggested it, and I'm the one that she's been like the brave leader. And, you know, I have to be honest, when I first met her, after all these years had passed, I was scared, and I thought, is this a setup? Is she tricking me? Is she trying to, you know, bring me into another ritual? I was a little worried, but I remembered the prayer that I had said that night, prompting me to change my name so that someone would find me, not knowing who it was. And so I trusted, and I had an experience driving up to meet her to go to the Masonic Temple. I was living in Springville, Utah at the time, and she was living in Magna. And so we agreed that we would meet in Salt Lake City. And on the way, I drove past Bluffdale, where I'd grown up, and Midvale. I took State Street, and I remembered a lot of the places that I'd been, Dr. Allred's office, and it was very triggering. I hadn't been back to Utah for a very, very long time, not to live there anyway, but I had come back. And as I drove to meet her and go through that tour of the Masonic Temple, the Spirit just said the key to moving forward and healing and becoming completely whole is to forgive, and to have a spirit of forgiveness in your heart. I believe that when you are drugged and you've watched people murdered in front of you, that you are doing something to save the lives of others at the peril of your own life. And as I got out of the car and saw her, I couldn't wait to hug Michelle and to feel her spirit and to be like with someone that had experienced the same things. We could finish each other's sentences as we described the Masonic Temple before we ever went in the door and started that tour.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
So we were talking about the Masonic Temple and the rituals there. The one I remember very distinctly was when I was very little, walking out onto a stage that had been built up in the center of the floor directly below that blue sky dome with the lights all around it. Before we walked out there, my father was standing with me. He worked for Salt Lake County. He was a computer software designer, engineer, programmer, and I believe that somehow he got sucked into this with his brother, who was a bishop at the time, a seminary teacher full-time, and eventually became a chaplain at the prison. My father pointed out into the audience. Sorry, I'm starting to feel kind of sick. I'm just going to take a breath. Okay. My father stood with me off stage, out of the room. There's entrances that come into that main auditorium, and there were other performers. There were many different types of rituals that people learned. All of them were satanic in nature, and they would take the group watching and the people on stage through an initiation where they became like a member of the society. And that ritual was going on before we came onto the stage and took our turn.
This is in the Salt Lake Masonic Lodge,
Salt
right?
Lake Masonic Lodge. And as we were waiting, he pointed to people sitting on, there were some chairs set up on the floor, and then there were the stadium seats that rose up on the sides, just like a theater. You can still see it that way today. I believe that the Masonic Lodge was rented out to this group. I've talked to several Masons who say they've never heard of this, and it makes them sick that this could be going on. But the connection that I'm finding in all of these rituals, it all leads back to Freemasonry. And I believe that Freemasonry was corrupted from the time of Solomon forward. Solomon himself became very wicked in his old age. So my father points out this ritual happening on the stage and says this is initiation. The initiates, this is like their baptism. They're joining in to this group that my father told me he'd been initiated into as well, and that he didn't believe there was any way for our family to escape. I watched on the stage a group of men come out, just like I described before, wearing black robes with nothing on underneath. In all the rituals, nobody had any clothes on underneath this robe. Sometimes they wore masks and headdresses, elaborate gowns, different rituals. There were different clothing that they wore. But in this instance, there was a woman completely nude laying on a bed-like altar. It looked like a mattress, but it was very decorated. It had, drapery around the base of it to make it look really pretty and beautiful. And all of these men lined up in this clockwork type circle. And then the men who break the circle and the men who start the chanting, kind of like orchestrating, they even had tones and sounds. Sometimes they had pre-recorded music, and the lights would come up or dim down. They liked the color red a lot. And so they had a spotlight that would come down and shine on the center of this stage. And the men came in, and each of them chanted, called down demons. You could see them just change. Their faces changed as though they had become what I would call possessed. And they walked around this woman, and each man took a turn raping her on this altar. And she seemed to be a person that was very willing. She didn't seem drugged to me. She was an adult. And I later saw her in another ritual in what I call the chess game. They had a game where they had adults dressed up like characters in the chess board, black and white again. One side dressed in white, the other in black, and they would literally I guess you could say, act out as though they were slaying the queen or the king whenever they got to that point in the chess game. And I saw this woman, she was a wife of a very prominent politician. I don't know who. But my father pointed out to me, sitting on the front row, other men who had once been in this ritual, and he said, that man you see in the center there, looking out onto the stage, that man is the mayor of Salt Lake City. Now, at this point, I'm telling you about my childhood, early, like 4 or 5 years old. So that would have been 1969, 1970. I would have been 4 years old in 68. So somewhere in that time period. Years later, I would be in a similar ritual in the Masonic Temple. The night after Thanksgiving, I believe, there was a full moon that rose in 1974 in November. Again, that ritual took place on the stage, and my father pointed out the man sitting in the center, again, the mayor of Salt Lake City. And then another man sitting close by with his wife, and he said, that is the chief of police for Salt Lake City right now, and he is from Murray. And I may have it wrong, but that's what stayed in my memory. And then another man, he said, and that man over there is the chief of police over Murray. And he wanted me to remember that the moon had risen full, that it was the day after Thanksgiving, and that this was some kind of huge harvest, festival. It was very elaborate. And it opened, the opening ceremony, 12 women came out on stage dressed in all the different, traditional cultural clothing of different nations. The woman that led them was painted with gold makeup. Everything she wore was gold. She carried in her arms a cornucopia, and they presented many different rituals. It was like watching a church dance festival where people have come from all over with their memorized routine that they present in order on a stage. And so going to dance recitals, being in dance recitals myself, often when I was standing off stage, I would remember the rituals. And the worst one that I ever saw was in the Masonic Temple when they brought out a baby who was black, naked, breathing. I was standing behind my father on the stage. He was wearing the black cape. Me, probably my sisters and others, were wearing white. And each of these men raped this baby that was probably 2 or 3 years old, breaking his legs. I watched this baby not breathing. And I thought about all the threats that we'd been given, that if we ever told anybody, I mean, even that threat hangs over me this very moment, that if we ever spoke and told what we had seen, that our children would be murdered in front of us like this. And so when Michelle and I went and toured that building and we walked into that auditorium, I took her hand and we just stood there and I said, Michelle, do you remember being saved by angels? And she said, yes. We were lifted up. Our spirits leaving our bodies somehow kept alive by the power of God, and we were in spiritual warfare. I saw the chanting below me. I saw angels around me. I saw demons in masses flying. I saw these swords, angels dressed in the full armor of God, and swords moving in unison, and we were absolutely protected. I can't describe the agonies that I have witnessed over and over as we were taken to perform these rituals in so many places, many times seeing the same politicians, the same members of the church. One leader of our church who was consistently present passed away in the summer of 2015, and at that point I felt free of his traps and his talks about little factories, and the spiritual abuse far outweighs any physical abuse. A ritual is a ritual. We have birthday parties. We have our morning rituals. We eat our breakfast. We have our evening ritual, washing our face, saying our prayers, reading our scriptures. All of these things are ritual. Graduations, weddings. But when abuse takes place during any of these rituals, it causes lasting damage, because anytime we are in another ritual type setting where candles are lit on a birthday cake in a circle, we learned how to not cry. We learned to be present, to smile, to be the ever-present cheerleader, which is what I became. My sister became a beauty queen and was in pageants, Miss Alpine, Miss Junior, Miss San Diego. And we had to be this narcissistic poster family in the church. But inside, my faith has never wavered that I am fighting a battle against Lucifer himself, and that Jesus Christ is my armor. There's nothing more powerful than his name. Nothing that stopped the wickedness and preserved my faith all of my life. He is the greatest of all, who heals those who turn to him. I need a break. I need a break.
I think we all do.
Yeah, I need a break too. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that was so beautiful, Gina. And honestly, like, this is what's hard. Is, you know, this is, you know, the grand battle, right, of light and dark, and it is raging, and the adversary is raging, and children are like, there is true collateral damage happening. Bodies are being dropped, and while it's the average person, especially here in Utah, you know, just thinks they're living in a happy valley, this battle is raging beneath in the shadows of the night. And nothing, and to me, I can think of, again, I just think of the reality of what is happening, the reality of this battle, and how sad it is that the people who should be leading the fight, you know, the gods, you know, in at least in Utah, the members of the church should be awake, should be fighting, should be, you know, standing with the Savior, protecting kids. And instead, we're focused on defending the perpetrators, you know, denying that the battle is happening. And I just think of the scripture of all is well in Zion. And it's just, you know, it's just, and that's why I just appreciate you, and I appreciate your sincerity. Take us to the Riverton Elementary. I know that was a very kind of a flashpoint event for you. Let's talk about that.
So the year of 1974, things came to a screaming culmination of all the rituals and the trafficking that we'd experienced. There was a family that I had grown up with learning these rituals who I believe were tied to the LeBaron they were tied to the Apostolic United Brethren, the AUB in Bluffdale.
AUB.
And intermarried with LeBarons. And so I tried so hard to protect my children and my friends from knowing the horror of this. I wanted my children to cling to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I wanted, because of experiences I've had, I've known that the gospel of Jesus Christ is true and the authority of Jesus Christ is still with the church. And I feel like Moroni in the letter to Pahoran, you know, what? Somebody explain why you're not coming. Are you under siege? Has this organization literally put a siege on the church? I don't know. I'm not buying it if it's real, because they've got a friend called Curtin McConkie that goes after people like me, but I think they should be looking at the little girl that I was. That's who they're talking to. They're talking to a 4-year-old. They're talking to a 10-year-old. They're talking to somebody who watched one of their leaders involved in these rituals. So, flashpoint, Bluffdale. Michelle and I lived through the field from each other. By the time this ritual was taking place, I am sure that Michelle and I had passed by each other in different places, perhaps at the same time. And I believe that we practiced this ritual multiple times before we actually performed it. The whole plan was to, one by one, remove these members of this family as a punishment. As a child, I had no idea what the purpose was. But as an adult, looking back and trying to make sense out of this chaos and crazy, I was able to try and figure out who these people were. By the time I was 10, I knew the polygamists in Bluffdale. We'd been there many times to their churches. I'd been to rituals in their canyon. I had been drugged. They had a woman that was part Native American who gave us peyote, put us out on a platform at night in the forest, you know, and gave us all kinds of commands, and we would hallucinate. And it was all part of the hypnosis and the training, I think, to keep us in sync and in line and doing exactly what we were told. And so the people involved in these, in the rituals in Riverton, I remember in September of 1974 on a weekend, close to the weekend, it was a school day, so maybe Thursday or Friday, that there was an assembly in the school and a police officer came that I recognized. We had been trafficked to him in Mill Creek. They put on assembly, and in that assembly, he was talking about safety patrol, crossing the street, putting, blinkers and reflectors on your bicycle, things like that, being careful about drugs. And so ironic, because that man later was in a ritual that day in the basement under the school. During the assembly, I was taken down some back stairs that go down into the old locker rooms that had been in the building when it had been a junior high. When I was attending, Riverton Elementary was no longer a junior high, and the locker rooms were used by the janitors for storage and things like that. So we were taken out of the gymnasium and down to the locker room, and we went down those back stairs. So we wouldn't really be seen in the hallway. We would leave the gym, go down those stairs, and enter into that room where Dr. Allred had his granddaughters. One of them, I knew from that summer that she was pregnant, and I don't know how far along she was. It could have been full term. They wore huge smock-type dresses with a little short bodice, and then it was gathered in thick layers of white, like a little apron with a dress underneath it, and that masked her pregnancy. Even as a tiny little 10-year-old, I couldn't imagine that my friend could be pregnant. I was a long way from going through puberty, at least I thought I was. I was on the brink of it, and yet I learned later from another friend who overheard the same teacher, Mr. Fairborn, that took me down those stairs out of that assembly into the locker room where we witnessed the forced delivery of this baby in front of me. I learned from a friend that Mr. Fairborn bragged to another teacher about this 10-year-old girl that had delivered a baby, and they were talking about the maturation program for 5th and 6th grade girls, where we would learn about our period and taking care of hygiene and things like that. And so this friend validated my memory and gave me strength as I went through my own healing. Back to the locker room, he takes this baby, cuts the cord, and the baby is wrapped and taken live somewhere else. We stayed in the room. He cleaned up the girls, and then we were taken down after school. I don't know how much time lapsed. I remember walking through the hall, and it seemed to me that the sun was setting. So in September in Utah, around the middle of the month, I remember that within that week, a friend of mine, my same friend, his mother had brought cupcakes for his birthday. So his birthday's around the 20th. We went down into the boiler room, and there was set up a cot. Well, I'd call it a cot, but it was more like a table with tarps over it and a thin mattress like you would put on a cot, just a plastic mattress. Laying there was my younger sister. They had drawn blood on her in a cross from one section of her chest across the center, from nipple to nipple, and from her throat down to her pubic bone, a cross drawn in blood. They laid this newborn baby on her. They were chanting, screaming. There were people crying. The girl's mother was there. Her father was there. They were forced to be there. Dr. Allred was there, and I watched him lay this baby down and call down Lucifer to possess this baby boy. He said a prayer about how grateful they were for this baby boy to have been born, and that the father of this child was a prominent leader in their church. I can only assume it was him. The rest of it was typical, slitting the throat from ear to ear, drawing a knife. He was a surgeon, a very skilled surgeon. He learned, I found out later, he had been trained as a surgeon in colonial Juarez and then moved into the United States and became the prophet of the Apostolic United Brethren. There were other men in that room that were his apostles, and there were children from the school, boys and girls, whose parents were also involved. And there was the police officer who had been part of the assembly that day in the school. The police officer was sitting with his back against the wall, a chair that was next to an opening in the school, in the basement. That opening went into a crawl space, and I remember him sitting beside that space and weeping. I learned later from Flora Jessup, an advocate from the, I believe she was part of the Colorado City and Hilldale polygamists, and she listened to me describe this person and what they look like. And she said, I believe he became a police officer in Murray and that he eventually ended his life. The janitors were scared. I remember seeing them sometimes pretend that they were excited. They took the organs out of this baby. They wrapped them in a white type of gauze because what had happened was they would call down Satan to these babies and try to get Satan to be embodied. And I've seen this ritual many times. In every case, the baby died. That's the power of God. Sad and tragic, but it breaks my heart to think that the people that I was taught, my 5th grade teacher was involved in this to that extent. My sister was extremely traumatized by that memory. We talked about it after the fact. We talked about it when we were in junior high. We talked about it in high school. We talked about it when she went to BYU after I was married. We talked about it until I couldn't talk anymore, and I went into a deep denial and tried to forget. The following month, after the Halloween carnival, we were suddenly told that we were staying to help clean up. Leo Crane, I remember him giving me a broom, just a standard like you'd use in your kitchen with a dustpan, telling me to sweep up little corners. Volunteers had already cleaned the gym where we'd had, different types of games, the cakewalk and a spook alley and really a fun Halloween activity for children. But there would be, spots in the school where there'd be the random candy wrappers and somebody's part of their costume, and we went through the building cleaning. And I can remember reaching down with this dustpan and the broom, kneeling on the floor, sweeping this candy wrappers up and dust, and thinking, what are we staying late for? What are we staying late for? Why are we staying late? So every time I've ever taught a child to sweep, use a dustpan, sweeping my own floor even today, every time, nearly every time, the memory of sweeping up Halloween leftovers, candy wrappers, the signs of children in a place that should have been happy, wonderful, the memory would come back all of my life. It was never something that some therapist put into my head and gave me hypnosis. I wish I'd had hypnosis to reverse it. I wish the Men in Black had shown up with a flashy thing. But instead, angels showed up that night. We were taken upstairs, I believe, to the 2nd floor bathrooms. There was a really big deal about coming all the way down flights of stairs, a certain number of stairs. Michelle was there. We were given the little paper cups, which was very common every single time I can remember ever going to a ritual. The little paper cup, little powdered, I think it was a sugar cube broken up in their fingers. My guess is they had laced it with LSD. I don't know. We would feel far away. Sometimes it was too much. I learned to sip a little bit of it and pretend that I was gulping while I took the cup and squeezed out that water and dropped the cup on the bathroom floor, refusing to drink it. They would give Michelle a lot because she was an adult. She was 20 and I was 10. The girls, in order by age, by groups of sisters, 3 sisters, 4 sets of sisters, downstairs into the boiler room. We turned the corner at the bottom of that staircase and walked directly into the room, a room that has now been changed. A wall has been built in the middle of it. But at that time, and in the video that I just received today from Utah County Sheriff's Office, they've been storing my records. They sent me a link, and I was able to look at it this morning before I came. And we'll share that later. We walked into the circle like we'd learned and practiced and done so many times before. Walking in, loading the circle. I stood on 10, where I usually stood, and I was 10 years old, and so this burned into my memory. My younger sister, being younger, would load the circle last, and she would stand on 11. The prominent figure, one of the girls who had had the baby, she stood on 12, and behind her stood her grandfather, Rulon Allred. My older sister, a year older than me, stood on 9. And I've always thought about this, that if I traded spaces with them, would I have stood on 9 or 11? The number 911 triggers my memory. It kept the memory alive enough for me to not forget. Not drinking all of the drug that night kept me present. Perhaps because my close friends, who I'd been to their birthday party when they turned 10 earlier in the year, spring, February of 1974, 3 sisters, triplets, turned 10. And there they were in the top of the circle at 12, 1, and 2. Next to them were relatives of Michelle, standing at 3, 4, 5. At the bottom of the circle, George Maycock's daughters. He has over 20 daughters. George Maycock's daughters standing at 7, 8, 6, 7, and 8. And then me and my sisters. The men came in. The candles were on the floor. There was a powder poured out on the floor between us, between the circles. I believe it was some kind of black powder, gunpowder. They lit this on fire, and it burned a ring around us. And that started the chanting. The men walking clockwise, and the girls walking counterclockwise until we had rotated around into a new position. At that point, men crossed the circle in the middle. During this ritual, the person that would be sacrificed was the father of the triplets, a LeBaron man. He was laid in a different spot, not in the center of the circle. He was laid on a gurney-type bed with tarps on the floor and pushed against the wall. On the adjacent side of that wall would be the boiler itself, and a hole had been cut into the cement on the side where it often burned, using the fires that heated the boiler, burned trash. Be positioned there with the other janitor during the ritual. There were some women there, some I knew from school, some related to Michelle. Michelle would break the circle, and all the girls would step backward and let the men stand in the center, and we would rotate and the chanting would begin again. At one point, all of the girls were forced to be laid out on the body of this man who was completely naked, who would be sacrificed, with more chanting. At one point, the men slit his throat and drained the blood into a cup, and using the blood as some kind of lubricant, raped all of the girls in the circle from behind, like sodomy. And at that point, the memory continues from the air. I see myself standing in a space that's impossible. I would have been standing in the space where the bathrooms were, directly above us, looking down on the circle and looking across in that space in the air, seeing spiritually my sisters and the other girls, all surrounded by angels, while we watched the continuation of the rape. When that part of it was over, I felt that we were brought back into the space again, into our bodies. I remember one of the girls collapsing, and it was Michelle's assignment to stand in her place if one of the girls didn't function. And I remember that we were all crying. I've never shared the details of this with Michelle. I don't know if you'll want to edit it out or leave it in, but perhaps ask her. After this, more chanting took place, and there was a banishment, some kind of a prayer or a pronouncement made that this man would be bound forever from ever being resurrected. They slit his throat and removed his head and passed it around the circle. We held his head by his hair. And then his head was returned to the circle, and the men passed his head around the circle. And then they removed his innards, taking his heart, cutting it up, and putting it on a silver tray, which was passed around the men, who ate pieces of his heart as though it was a sacrament to Satan. All I can understand is that this man wanted his family out, and this was how it ended for them. The other organs were all removed, and they wrapped them. Chanting was said, a pronouncement that this organ, this other organ, all of these different organs, vital organs, the liver, kidneys, would not ever be reunited again during the resurrection, that he would be banished and separate. He removed his arms and his legs and his torso, put them into gunny sack bags, and dragged them over to the crawl space. Later, Michelle and I, my sisters, would drag these bags, these tarps, into the crawl space and leave them there. The following month, I've already described the ritual in the Masonic Temple, which was held again on a full moon. I used to think the moon only rose full on Halloween until I became an adult and looked at the moon cycles and realized that it had just been that year. It's a very rare thing to have the moon rise full on Halloween night.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. I'm having a breakdown right here. Sorry.
How do you feel about Halloween now?
I had a wonderful third grade teacher. So before this night, she had served a mission. Her name was Miss Williams. My picture in third grade, I have blonde hair with braids because I wanted to be Laura Ingalls Wilder when I grew up. And she said that Halloween had first been a Christian celebration to remember our loved ones, to honor them, and that pumpkins and gourds were carved and lights put in to recognize them, and the light of Christ, the power of God, shining in the darkness. She gave me my first taste of art history and my love for it when she said that there were colors in art that reminded us. And she said orange was the color of protection, the guardian of children. As an artist, I have artwork licensed right now that lights up in the dark for children. And I focus on that the light shineth, that our memories of our loved ones, our ancestors, I believe that the angels that have watched over me throughout my life, that some of them are my righteous ancestors. Perhaps some of them were my children who would yet be born to me. So I think that every single symbol for good to remind us of Christ was hijacked.
It's funny, I used to always enjoy Halloween after last year and everything we experienced, talking to survivors and hearing stories like last year when Halloween came along, like my wife and I just couldn't, we just couldn't handle it, and we just couldn't, it just lost its innocence for us. And, and I don't know, it's hard, especially when it feels to me like a holiday that the adversary and those who worship him get to put their beliefs on full display and have it be celebrated and not seen as evil. And it's just interesting how I see more and more of these homes hang on to these massive skeletons throughout the year, and they never take it down. And it's just, I don't know, I've just lost my innocence for that holiday. Yes, and hearing stories like this, and I've heard many others, it's just been extremely painful. Okay, yeah, here we are on Google. Where has there been a full moon on Halloween? 1906, 1925, 1944, 1955, 1974. We just had someone in here in the studio pull this up. 1993, 2001, 2020. The next one is 2039. So yes, 1974. That was your experience.
The next thing that happened after the ritual, so we got something September, October, November, come to December. These rituals take place in the building when there's been a huge activity, lots of people in the building, lots of cars. It's easy to infiltrate a public space when it's being used by the public and there's a crowd. It's easier to get your gear in there and to sneak something in when it's busy than when there's nobody in the parking lot. Nobody's going to notice 5 or 6 extra cars and people when it's packed. So the same thing happened. Again, we're talking about Riverton Elementary, 1974, Christmas time, the program. So the night of the school program, I'm on the stage with my fellow classmates. We're singing Christmas carols, Christmas songs. And I look up into the balcony in Riverton Elementary. We do have the video now that can show you what that space looked like back in the day. And up in the balcony seats directly straight back are the 3 girls that their father had been murdered in October. And they had a little brother that was like 2 years old. I don't remember seeing him that night. Maybe I do, but right now it's not there. But the mother is there. And I think, why? They didn't live in our area. They didn't go to our school. They lived in the Mill Creek area. And I see them and I just felt frozen. I remember their black watch plaid dresses, the very traditional black, red, green plaid. As an artist, I have never been able to fulfill an assignment from a client when they've asked me for that plaid. I just literally block it out or I can't do it. Come up with a zillion different ways to create a plaid for Christmas. I can do it, but not that. They were wearing Mary Jane shoes, and they had their hair done up in a big black satin bow. They looked beautiful. When that night the Christmas program was over, again, we were kept behind to clean up the school and then taken to the basement. This time, we were asked to put on Sunday clothes. Dresses were brought. My dad brought them, and my sisters were there in the room. We went down to a room that I think was called the kiln room. Sometimes they called it the fallout shelter. I remember doing ceramics and going down to the kiln to get them out. That was that space, and it's just off the main floor in Riverton. That room is still used today. They have, I believe, their routers in there for their internet. And I saw that video that Michelle did when she did her walkthrough with law enforcement, and that room is still being used. So we went into that room, and there were men wearing Sunday suits, like their dress suits and ties. Nothing like the other rituals I'd ever been to. We were asked to kneel down. The little girls knelt down around their mother, who was laying there on this cot completely naked. She was drugged. I could see her heart barely moving, like lungs barely going in and out. She, I believe, had her brother standing beside her, or other leaders from the AUB. There was only one light on in the room. There was a light in the center of that room. And at that time, I thought it was just a light bulb with a chain. And you pull the chain and it turns on the light. There was a drain in the floor that has a metal cover to it. I remember stepping on that when we went into the room, and I panicked. We have that on the video that I just got, so we can show that later. My father stood outside. The men were standing in suits in an outside circle. The girls knelt down around this cot. It was literally a camping cot. And Dr. Allred knelt at his daughter's head, looking down on her face, and took out like a surgical scalpel, took my hand with his hand and gripped that scalpel and slit her throat from her left ear to her right ear, and blood ran. Then he slit her open again like they had done her husband, and all the way from her breastbone to her pubic bone, pulled it back. He clamped everything and then reached in and pulled out her beating heart. He had drugged her to the point of not being able to feel any of this. Her eyes were frozen, like catatonic, looking up. I am certain, from what I've learned, that she was probably standing in the air with her husband's spirit, who had been murdered in October. I didn't see that, but that's, from my experience, that's what happens when the unspeakable is happening in front of you. Dr. Allred removed organ after organ, blessing it, that she would be forgiven for blasphemy, for leaving the church, for defying him, for being disobedient, for marrying outside of their faith, as she married a LeBaron instead of an Allred. Organ by organ, wrapped like you would in some Egyptian ritual, like they would have done, and placed in canopic jars. I only describe it that way from movies I've seen that triggered me. Again, memories coming back from my whole life being triggered. As he blessed her body, he did not dismember her. He didn't cut off her head. I don't know what happened, but I know that they pulled her organs, her entrails out, and opened up that trap door in the floor that goes into some kind of sewer or drain, and put her intestines down and her stomach into that drain. Within a week or so, coming back, I don't know what would have happened. The smell, I remember coming back when school was back in session, that the bathroom smelled like rotting flesh. I knew that from being on a farm and being around animals that had died. and the bathroom was hardly usable by any of the girls. The girls' bathroom especially, that bathroom sits right above the crawl space. The crawl space is huge next to the kiln room, and you can go through a cutout in the cement wall, climb down in there. There's electrical cords, there's pipes, there's water pipes running through that ceiling in there, and you can walk around in the dirt. When we looked at it, when we had our video done, there was a shovel literally stuck in the dirt in the middle, like a shovel like you dig a big hole with was there. And I didn't see it on the video we took, but I remember seeing it in the distance. As I looked out into the darkness, I could see that shovel. I don't know what they did with this woman's body. I don't know if they buried organs there, burned them in the incinerator, took her body somewhere else and buried her. But I remember Dr. Allred kneeling there, pronouncing all of these blessings upon his daughter, and crying like I'm crying, sobbing, tears running, shaking. And I felt absolutely conflicted about this man. What did he believe? Who did he worship? Still, it just doesn't compute. I can't wrap my mind around it even today. Months later, we practiced a play that would be put on for President's Day in the school. I was to play Benedict Arnold and be hung like a traitor. This was Mr. Fairborn's play. It was his idea. During the day, I played Benedict Arnold and performed it in the school for the kids attending in the daytime. At night, we put the play on for the community. That night was the worst snowfall, I think, in the history of Riverton up to that point. It was absolutely a whiteout, but people came. They came when the snow started falling. By the time they left, it was probably a foot deep. It was insane how much snow came down that night. And again, disaster. Cleaning up afterward, helping. We ended up going into the locker room area where Dr. Allred slit the girls' throats one by one, removed their heads, arms, and legs.
This is the daughters.
The daughters, the 3 daughters that had been alive, that had been there when their father was murdered, when their mother was murdered. We're talking about homicides after homicides. We're talking about raping children during rituals. We're talking about threatening them within their, the inch of their life. And then here we see it. We experience it. So the fear is real. These girls, I believe Michelle was there that night. I believe she was in the building helping us change the night they killed the woman I call Catherine Allred LeBaron. The girls were decapitated. My younger sister was tied up to either the faucet in the shower or somehow wrapped and hung by cords from a shower head in that locker room. And there was a shower space in there and bathrooms and urinals. It had once been a locker room for the junior high. We watched the girls be dismembered, arms and legs put into gunny sacks. I remember carrying their heads later. They were put in a tarp, but I remember a tunnel in the boiler room. It seemed to me this tunnel was tall enough that I could run in that space. I was handed one of the girls' heads, and I was told to take it through the tunnel as far as I could go. And it seemed to me that I ran 50 yards in the darkness to a light that they had placed at the end of that space where I laid her head, and there were her sister's heads had already been put there, possibly by Michelle or my sister. My sister remained tied up in the locker, and I believe it was a way to threaten us that if we didn't do what we were told to do, that she was next. We helped carry the torso part of the girls' bodies and put them in the back truck. which was parked at the end of the hallway just outside the lockers, where the stairs come down from the back of the stage. The doorway opened, and he had his truck running, and my sisters got in and sat there with the tarp. With the snow falling, she sat in the back of the truck with these 3 torsos and then crawled under the tarp with them and helped bury them on Leo Crane's property. Again, this is like, sorry, it's so hard to talk about. Later, my sister, in the spring, when the snow thawed, she took me for a walk down property. There was a huge tree in the back corner where the hill rises behind it and the canal runs. There was a tree, and you could see where mounds of dirt had been piled up, where bare dirt was now mounding up and the snow was melting away from it. You could see where grass was coming up through the snow next to these mounds. And she said, this is where the girls' bodies are. I don't know where they put the arms and legs and heads. And I said, they're in different crawl spaces, or I called them tunnels, the tunnels in the school. I remembered where I had dragged them to. Whether or not they would have left them there, I seriously doubt. These were access tunnels where you would go in to work on the pipes and the electrical, things like that. But there's a possibility that in a room that you could access from outside the building that was adjacent to the boiler, there was a room that had a massive bellows. And from that room, you could get into the crawl space that would have gone all the way under the bathrooms on the main floor over to the kiln room area where Elizabeth's mother, well, the girl's mother, called Elizabeth and Eileen and Isabel LeBaron, their mother had been killed in that space. And so I realized that they could have buried remains in that space. And it's a space that Riverton has never run any cadaver dogs and refuses to do so to this day, to my knowledge. So moving forward, the year after that, I refused to be a girl. I went into puberty. My sisters and I were being trafficked outside the Hotel Utah. We didn't go back. Once you reach puberty, you don't go there. My older sister was being trained. She was a model at Sears, and I would be 11 going on 12. I needed braces on my teeth and wouldn't get them till the following summer. And I felt like I had hit the ugly tree. Like, what was that line from that movie? The girl that hit every branch of the ugly tree on the way down. That was me. And I wanted to be a boy. I wouldn't wash my hair. I'd go to school and take my bra off and throw it in the trash in the bathroom. And the teacher, Mr. Barrett, was an amazing teacher. There's been these men along the way that carried me because they saw the patterns of abuse and behavior, and they called it like they saw it, and they tried their best. And I remember him taking me aside and talking to me and saying there are several girls in the school that seem to have knowledge about adult types of things. Like, you've been through the maturation program. You should understand where babies come from. It seems that the boys, some of the boys in school are attacking the girls. You guys are playing this game called rape on the playground. And it was true. We would bring our purses and put rocks in there, and we'd swing them around our head and strike a boy on the head. And it was like this hysterical game that we were playing. And it was ridiculous, but it was telling. We'd play soccer, and the boys would jump us, and they'd start acting like they were humping us. And these are 11-year-olds. And so this teacher picked up on it, and he wanted to know. And we're talking about in the room next door, just down the hall, the very first room you come to from Mr. Barrett's class was Mr. Fairborn's class. And I have learned in my life the parables of the 10 virgins describes a percentage. 10, half of them don't make it. They're not welcome. There's another one that talks about there'll be 2 in the field, the same field. And at the time of Christ, when the earth burns, one will be left and the other will be taken. 2 people in the same field are teachers, they're principals, they're working in law enforcement, they're parents, they're family members. And I believe that that is our statistic. Unfortunately, it is far worse. And I'm not saying that 50% of the population is involved in satanic ritual abuse, but I'm saying that 50% of our population is engaging in behaviors that are damning, that are abusive, that involve trafficking of children, people who buy child porn. This country that I love is the biggest buyer and the biggest seller of child porn in the world. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about statistics. The person sitting next to you on the High Council, the person in the bishopric on your right-hand man doesn't know what the left-hand man is doing. For me, these men that were like beacons of light led me forward. As I went forward in my life, my family eventually left Utah. In 1978, my parents took out all the equity from the farm in Bluffdale. They paid cash to 3 men who were outside of our barn. One was my neighbor, John Llewellyn. I didn't know at the time, I wouldn't know until I was in my 30s, that he was the sex crimes detective for Salt Lake County. The other man standing there was Jerry Townsend, and the third was Elmer Leake. When I look back on that, and my father giving them $20,000 cash, and then we moved to New Jersey unannounced. I was a cheerleader. I was so excited. Finally had braces on my teeth. I felt like I'd survived the ugly and was starting to bloom. We leave Utah without, at a moment's notice, and we are raped. My sisters and I raped the last time in Utah by these men who were there. One, John Llewellyn, without any uniform. I did not know that he was a member of law enforcement. The other 2 men were in their uniforms. We moved to New Jersey. I became a cheerleader there, and the mascot for the school, Hunterdon Central Red Devils. By then, we live in a ward with a wonderful Bishop Bradshaw, who recognized more symptoms. My sisters and I got boyfriends. Mine was on the football team, and immediately fell into, breaking commandments and living on the edge, doing things I didn't want to do, but suddenly felt free to choose. Bishop Bradshaw knelt with me in his office and asked me to tell him what my family was involved in, that he'd talked to my older sister. It was then that I described what my parents had done, that we were still being abused at home. My father raped my sisters and I many times in our childhood. And he confronted my parents, and within a few months, we moved to San Diego. From there, I graduate high school after having spent 3 years with one of the best men I ever knew. And that was Mel Sketzlar, who was my stake president and my art teacher. I saw him every day in art class. He became another lifeline. I spent hours alone with him painting the senior mural that still hangs on the walls of Valhalla High School in El Cajon, California. I learned that I could be alone with an adult who respected me, who taught me the gospel, in a lot of different ways. At the same time, I had a bishop that when we had first moved to San Diego, Bishop Donald P. Tenney, who was amazing as well, and who put his arm around me and gave me counsel. Even when we moved away, the ward was split and it became Alpine Ward. My dad was called into the bishopric of that ward our bishop was having an affair with my young women's president. It was very blatant. We would see her getting into his motorhome during campouts that he organized for the youth. I talked to him about my father and the abuse, and he said, you need to forgive and forget. And when you leave home, it's critical that you write a letter acknowledging every good thing your parents ever did. If you don't forgive, then the greater sin is on your head. My parents have that letter that I wrote to this day, and they use it as evidence that they were perfect and righteous and good. I went off to Rick's College, got married a year later, had a family. When my daughter was 6, I discovered that her teacher was molesting her and the other girls in the class in our ward in Mira Mesa.
Who was molesting your daughter?
The name of that teacher was John Allen Midget.
Was this a school teacher or a church leader?
He was the church primary teacher.
Where was this at?
It was in Penasquitos Stake in San Diego, and it was 1991, I believe, until 1992.
So what happened?
It was
How'd you find out?
So this man came into the ward totally excited to serve in primary, and we needed teachers because we had a lot of young families, moms getting pregnant. We had a military ward. We lived right near Top Gun Miramar at that point. The Navy base was there. People in our ward, went through deployments. And so we had a lot of problems keeping teachers that could be reliable in primary. He came in, I was in the primary presidency at the time. I was a counselor. And he wanted to have that calling in primary. He wanted to teach the younger kids. We needed somebody to teach the 10, 11-year-olds. And he refused. He said, if I'm going to teach or I'm going to have a calling, it's primary. It's the little kids. I don't know how to deal with older kids. I do really, really well with little kids. So we shuffled the teachers around. He took on a second class. When the teachers wouldn't show up, he took 2 classes at a time. He molested all of the children in those classes. He started grooming them by having them raise their arm to the square. When in the church, we raise our arm to the square and make this shape. So he had the kids do that and said, your parents all put their arm up and sustain me. So that means that whatever I do is ordained of God, and then taught them all about God and keeping promises. And if you break a promise, you're going to go to hell. And so these little kids began to obey everything he told them to do. Simon says if they didn't do the game right, he cut their piece of licorice. So he'd bring in these huge red vine ropes of licorice. I still, to this day, I can't look at giant red vine without thinking of this. So he would tack these red vine ropes along the tack strip of the chalkboard in the classroom behind him. Had a pair of scissors. He was also a very well-trained magician, and he put on children's parties and did this magic act. So he had this little slogan on his business card that said, master at the sleight of hand. He would, during the class period time, he'd be telling a story. He'd have a puppet, on one hand, and he'd be fingering a girl under her dress while they're on his lap with his other hand. He would part their legs and move their dress so that the other kids could see where his fingers were. Around that time, my daughter, it was getting to be spring, and I remember asking her, let's go shopping, because her white tights were getting so shabby and pilled and ripped. And she was miserable. She loved primary, and then she didn't. And it was like day and night. She began to rip her dresses. Her dresses had been like a trophy, something that, her favorite thing in the whole world, that, if you get a stain on her dress, she's furious. And suddenly she was coloring them with magic marker, Sharpie marker. She was climbing a tree, putting the dress over a branch and ripping, a big hole in the dress, and bringing the dress and saying, I can't go to church. I don't have a dress. I took her shopping. We bought another dress. And then here I am, triggered again by my own memories, getting her some Mary Jane shoes, some little lace ankle socks, and having her wear that. She came home from primary sick to her stomach. And we called our home teacher to give her a blessing because she was so sick. She could not stop throwing up, just completely not herself. So we called John Allen Midget, who was our home teacher, to give my daughter a blessing of comfort and healing. And she cried and did not want to sit still through that.
Oh,
When he left.
Is he the one that was abusing her?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Her primary teacher was our home
Oh
teacher.
my gosh.
So there was these flags, and I started seeing myself in my daughter. My son is in here. Sorry, Ryan. He's just never heard these stories. Ryan was born that year. The teacher began to teach 2 classes at a time. So he had the older kids and would take them on teacher outings. The bishopric disapproved and said he could only go if he took 2 at a time. So he took them to Disneyland and he molested them on the rides, one girl on one side and one on the other. The day came that he called me and said, I've been chatting with your daughter and another girl that lived around the corner from us, also in primary. And he said, I realize that they're free this week. They don't have any dental appointments or dance classes. So I think it's the perfect time to take them to this movie that just came out. And I'm going to take them to the matinee. And so I'm picking them up from school. He knew exactly what school these kids went to. He knew what time they were out of school. He'd gotten all this information. And he says, I'll be on my way to pick them up. So I'll bring them over after dinner, after the movies. And hung up on me. And I felt the spirit just like a pillar. It was the same kind of feeling that I would have during the rituals when I felt like God was just like, wake up, keep your faith. I'm right here. I'm right here. And this presence in the room, like an angel saying, you need to pray. Get down on your knees and pray. And I dropped to my knees and I said, Heavenly Father, I don't know what is going on right now, but I ask you to protect my daughter. I cannot allow anything to happen to my daughter like what happened to me. About 30 minutes later, maybe an hour, my daughter came through the door of our house with her friend, and I was shocked. I thought surely this teacher was coming for them. And I asked them, did you see your primary teacher? No. And then my daughter, I want to go over to the neighbor girl's house. And I said, okay. They grabbed a few toys. They're 6 years old. We're talking first grade. You get their dolls. They're going out the front door, and the spirit says, stop the girls. So I said, wait, I call out my daughter and her friend by name. And I said, I want you to come talk to me for a minute about primary. These words just came to me. Is there anything happening in primary that you don't like? Is there anything that happens in primary that makes you feel uncomfortable? It could be anything. I mean, the chair's too cold. Is the room too hot? Is somebody bothering you? And my daughter looked at me with her eyes wide and said, no, nothing's happening in primary. And her friend started rocking back and forth and holding her stomach. And she said, there is something happening, but I don't think he knows what he's doing. And I said, what? And I says, well, something kept me calm. I mean, obviously the Holy Ghost comforted me because I just remained so calm. And I said, would you feel more comfortable talking about this if we go talk to your mom? And she says, yeah. So we walked over to the neighbor's house and we sat down together. And at one point, I realized that this little girl had been through far worse abuse than my daughter would later tell me. This man had been coming to her house and parking his car. They lived next door to the church, and there was a brick wall that was built up in steps. So there was a really low wall that you could step up on easily and then climb to the next level and the next level. And he would park there, and their family's backyard backed up to this fence with their trampoline. So if she went out and jumped on the trampoline, he'd pull in his car, pull in his little blue Trans Am, and invite her to come get in the car. And in the car, he gave her candy and molested her over and over again, and digitally raping this little girl. Because my daughter had refused to wear tights until the one day that she didn't, she had been protected from that to the greater extent of that she'd only been fondled by him. I don't want to just minimize it like that, but it damaged my daughter's faith, not only in her parents, the church. At that point, my neighbor said, we need to report this to the bishop, but we need to call the police first. And I didn't agree. I thought, we need to get him out of primary first. And she said, fine, you make your phone call, I'll make mine. And we agreed that we would tag team this the whole way. She would deal with law enforcement and I would deal with the church. My husband came home from work and I told him what had happened. And he said, there's no way. There's no way. We believe that men are called of God by prophecy, by the laying on of hands, by those who are in authority to preach the gospel and administer in the ordinances thereof. And when he was set apart, the bishop would have known. He would have felt something was off. But this can't happen. Like, this can't happen, not to our daughter, not here. But it did. The bishop receives this call from my husband. He calls John Midget. John Midget denies everything, calls me a liar. My husband and I got in a huge fight. I'm the crazy, I'm the liar. And then my husband talked to our daughter. And then he realized that far more than what she'd ever told me was coming out about what he had done to other children in the class, about all the games, the grooming, everything. The DA got involved. John was arrested. Our stake president was very diligent in getting information out of John. He met with him in prison. He got a list from John of over 100 names of children who'd been molested around the world because John had been in the military and the Navy. He got out and he was working as a civilian on nuclear subs. At the time, he was molesting kids in our ward. John had been employed by the military, so he'd been Navy. And then he had gotten out and was working as a civilian on Navy subs, nuclear subs in San Diego. And everybody thought he's smart. He's dating a couple of women. He's early 30s, friendly, nice. He's a great guy. The stake president went down to the jail. Maybe he was in jail before you go to prison, but he got a list of 100 victims and was still getting more after John was sentenced. During that time period, we met with the DA. There were probably 18 children in our ward alone that had been molested. There were children from other wards where he had come and done a birthday party as the magician and had molested children during a puppet show, magic show, always a girl on one lap. At one point, after the DA had asked all of the parents to meet with them, the children would be interviewed and examined. The church sent a general authority. I don't know who. But the stake leaders came and took over our ward for one Sunday, and all of the adults were called into the Sunday school. I remember standing in the back holding my son, Ryan, in my arms. He was about a year old. I leaned my back against the wall and just waited for what was this meeting? What were they doing? And before anything really got said, they announced that they were going to have everyone swear an oath of secrecy and that they would not reveal at all what they were swearing to agree to. but they wanted first everyone to swear this oath of secrecy.
You're kidding me.
Everybody in the room that I could see raised their arm to the square, except me. I put both my arms around my son and watched people just agree. They were sworn to never reveal what had happened, to never talk about it, to never discuss it with each other, to not talk to the press. This didn't happen. Then they dissolved the ward eventually. There is no Mira Mesa Second Ward anymore that I know of. As a result, only 8 of the 18 went forward with the trial. And as a result, instead of getting a life sentence, he was sentenced to 25 years. And when he grew 30, he got out in 25 and began to immediately contact his victims through social media. I was one that he contacted. Our stake president was really upset that this happened and called the parents together, called them one by one privately because we got a phone call. He wanted to meet with us. And he said, please do not withdraw your daughter. I'm working on getting John to confess and to plead guilty so the children don't have to testify. Please do not withdraw from this. And he then said, whoever sent down this order from the church has basically committed acts, felony acts of witness tampering and obstruction of justice by having all of these parents swear an oath.
Wow. Was Curtin McConkie involved with this?
I don't know. I don't know their history, but I think they've been around a long time, and I'm certain that attorneys were like, we're going to protect the name of the church. We don't want this in the paper. Don't talk to the press. The first thing that I did when I left that meeting was find my friend who hadn't come to church, my neighbor. She was just so distraught. She said, I don't know if I can go back. And there was another family in the ward that wanted to invite him over for dinner. They turned out later he'd babysat for them when they'd go to the temple. This is before the San Diego temple was built. And he'd molested every single one of their children from their teenager down to their newborn son. And at that time, they were willing to forgive and forget and to never discuss what had happened in the ward.
Sickening.
And that the only authority that mattered was the church.
We've got a team member here that just pulled up a Floodlit article. We'll put this up on the website or up on the screen. Floodlit, by the way, if you're not following Floodlit, please follow them. They've done a phenomenal job documenting this type of abuse within the church. But here they have it. John Midget was a Mormon Sunday school teacher in San Diego area, also known as a Navy petty officer, first class, accused of 43 felony counts of child molestation for allegedly sexually abusing 8 girls ages 5 to 10 in his Sunday school class. Pled guilty and was sentenced to 30 years. As of 2024, he lives in Bountiful as a registered sex offender. The sexual assaults took place in LDS chapels in the Mira Mesa, Ranchero Penasquitos, or in the girls' homes. Midget confessed some of his sex crimes to LDS leaders who reported the abuse to police. Thank you, LDS leaders who reported that to police. And you can go on and read this. But here's the thing that people need to understand: why would this the average pedophile abuses over 100 victims, 100 kids, and so. Trying to protect, trying to hide, trying to, this is part of the abomination that I think we are under for allowing this and hiding it in order to say, hey, let's protect the reputation of the church. Let's protect. Anyways, thank the Lord, thank God that you guys went to the police, not just try to keep it in the church, because how many more victims, how many more bodies, lives would be destroyed.
Yeah, this was a huge catalyst for me, recognizing that all of the sexual abuse that had happened to me were felony. They were felonies. And the DA described this. He says, every single time this man moved his hand upon a private part of a child's body, that's one felony count. And I thought of my life. And my state president became a lifeline. He was an attorney. And he and his wife, Jean, eventually were called to be general authorities and were sent to Russia, to the outer whatever, Mongolia, because he wanted to follow up. He wanted to follow up, make sure these kids are okay.
And, you know, and thank God to those good church leaders who are willing to stand and fight for kids and put them first. But those shepherds who are on the wrong side of this, whether it's, you know, those who are abusing you as you were a child or those protecting these perpetrators, there's a special place in hell for them. There's nothing worse than shepherds preying on the flocks or protecting perpetrators who are abusing kids. Hey guys, thank you so much for sitting with us and sitting with Gina as she tells her story. As we've talked about, there is no question when you look at the Epstein files that that the people in power, that the people in the media, that the people, the judges, that the politicians are trying to cover this up. They have no interest clearly in protecting these children. The people who are running this country and this state are actively protecting pedophiles. How can we trust these people as now they're taking us into war? How can we trust these people that we know are protecting and ritually abusing children are looking out for our best interest? I do not believe these people are looking out for our best interest. I believe we have to be looking out for ourselves. And I'm going to encourage you. One of my biggest concerns is you look what's happening in this war is the potential for energy crisis. We know they want to get us to a point where we'll own nothing and be happy, where they don't want us traveling, where they want us all on smart meters, where they can control the people, where they have us on our digital IDs. I don't believe in being alarmist, but I do believe in being smart. When the writing is on the wall, at this point, when you can see who's running this state and this country, we must be prepared. One thing is obviously food storage. Two, I mean, you're going to have to follow your gut and how to be prepared. But I will tell you this, with the drought that is coming, that is here, with the way they are talking about refilling the Great Salt Lake, with the way they're talking about sending all of our water to these data centers, water is going to be one of the most critical issues, having access to water, even if they try to limit or turn off your water. One of the things I would highly, highly encourage you to do is go to Century H2O, go to our website, weirdthepeople.org, go to wellness, and they have a product for preppers. It is a pump. Well, it's not a pump. It's a filtering system that you can put into a pump, and you can take water from Utah Lake. You can take water from any source of water, that's from your irrigation water, and pump it through this filtration system, and you will have water, the best water you can get. There's no way to store enough water to take care of your family. And so please, I'm asking you that it is a solution that makes sense. Please don't be caught without being able to give your drink. It's not about fear. It's about reality. It's about just being prepared. Same with food. But again, water's the first thing. And water is going to be an issue. So Century H2O, put in our code, We Are the People, get a 10% discount. It's just something that I really believe people need. Obviously, I think you need to have it in your house too. You cannot be drinking the garbage that goes through there. So anyways, thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. And thank you for supporting Gina. Let's get back into the show here. So let's fast forward. Your daughter's 16. You have been through, to say hell and back is almost, I don't know, it's putting it lightly. At this point, from what I understand, you get not almost suicidal. Tell us what's happening at this point in your life and how that changes the trajectory.
Well, at the time my daughter was abused, my father was serving on the High Council in their stake in Carlsbad. My mother was serving as the stake Young Women's President. At the advisement of my stake president, who was handling this John Midget thing, he encouraged me to confront them and to report them. I was immediately disowned. So years and years go by. We've moved. We're living in Bakersfield, California. And I find out that my father, well, I have to back up. My sisters and I had already gone to Utah a couple of times to report the crimes. This is before Michelle came in the picture. So in August of that year of 2002, I started having a breakdown when I learned that my father was a newly called bishop. A friend of mine had found me on a genealogy site, and we were catching up through emails. All of those emails have been recorded and documented, and they're now in microfilm, digitized by Utah County Sheriff's Office to be kept in safekeeping, and I have copies of them all as I received them this morning.
We'll put those on
So
the
I began to
screen.
tell him,
Yeah, so I have, at that time, we went to Utah, and I got this binder from the Attorney General's office. They gave me the ritual abuse report from the Attorney General's office.
Was this Mark Shirtliff at this point, or is this pretty?
yep,
So this
Yeah.
was Mark Shirtliff's team, and so that happened. I confronted the church. I sent letters to. Actually, I told my bishop, and he said you need to call the hotline. We have this new hotline thing. So I called and reported my dad, and my sisters did as well, thinking that that's what you do when you're talking about abuse. And they immediately transferred us to the director, whose name was Ped0phile. And long story short, we had many conversations. I had emails coming back and forth from the state of Utah, from Ped0phile, and from a friend, and the FBI who had interviewed my sisters and I. He had sent the reports to the FBI office in Salt Lake, and all of these things were coming to a head. And I made an appointment through Lance B. Wickman with the church to visit with my father. They were coming. My parents, I learned, were going to be visiting. My brothers were coming. There was a baby going to be blessed. One of my brothers had a newborn, and that they were having a family reunion. So we agreed, Lance B. Wickman and I and Ped0phile, that we would have a meeting that following Monday. And to my knowledge, Lance never contacted my father. He contacted his stake president, and the stake president said that it was going to make him look bad to have a council when they had this newly called bishop that had only been in since August. So here it is, November, Thanksgiving time, another huge trigger for me. I'm in Salt Lake City, again, every holiday, and my family, and we visited, we saw them on Temple Square. We went to see the lights, and they were there. And the following Monday comes, and I go for my appointment at 8 a.m. Temple to the church office buildings. I go to the counter, and I say, I'm here for the meeting. It's with Lance B. Wickman. And she calls up, the receptionist calls his office, and he says, I've never heard of her. I don't know who this Gina is. Like, I don't have any knowledge of her. I don't have an appointment with her. Tell her I'm sorry. Click off the phone. She's like, he doesn't know who you are. I felt like I had been hit by a train. And I walked off of Temple Square thinking there's tunnels under here. I've been in that Hotel Utah. I have been trafficked. And I get in the car with my husband, and I am a wreck. We get the kids and drive back home to San Diego, well, Bakersfield. We lived in Bakersfield then. And I remember when we arrived, I got out of the car, walked in the house, and thought, I don't want to live. I must be crazy. How could the church that I have so much faith in, I've been a temple worker by now, I've had all these callings, I've been through all this stuff with my daughter, and now we've reported my dad to the church like clear back in 1992, and it's 2002, it's 10 years later, and he's a bishop. And I'd seen my mother, we'd gone to his ward for my brother's baby's blessing. I sat there in the building with my Uncle George, who had raped my sister, in front of me several times. He'd raped me, raped my Native American Indian placement sister, so we still don't know where she is. And I'm sitting next to George on one side, my dad's on the stand, and I am coming apart. So by the time we reached Bakersfield, I took a bottle of pain pills that had been left over from my husband's surgery. And there were 17 Vicodin, and I counted them out on my lap and took them 2 at a time with water. He came into the room when I was taking the last 2 and knocked them out of my hand, called 911. And at that point, I just felt, again, angels. Instead of feeling condemned, the question was, Gina, what do you want? And I said, I want to live. But I don't know why. And my liver was failing. I went into a hospital. Miracles happened. My bishop, who had told me, there's no way this could have happened to you, he called the general authority. The general authority came to the house. My sisters were there. Well, one came by phone. My other sister lived nearby, and my daughter, we all sat around the dining room table while Tad, our Callister, sat there with us. And we talked about the atonement of Jesus Christ. He offered us money to keep our story quiet, wanted to know how much money we needed. At this point, I had been through being in the psych ward in the hospital on suicide watch. I said, I just want a really good therapist. I went to a women's conference. There was a woman speaking, Kathy Bowers. She was a licensed therapist. And the Spirit came over me and just said, that's the woman you need. So I told my bishop, I want you to find Kathy Bowers. You spoke with her at that, it was a multi-stake women's conference. And they both sat on the stand together and spoken about family and healing and therapy. She became my therapist, and she was incredible. She guided me to learn how to use tools in my mind to figure out what it was I wanted. By the time I got out of the hospital, first of all, they wouldn't release me from a mental hospital until I had a reason to live that they agreed was a good one, and I couldn't come up with any. That's a whole other story. But I learned that I needed to live. My reason for living was because I had more to learn. I had more to learn. Not to give, not to do, not to become, just more to learn. Kathy suggested that the most healing thing she could see me doing was to walk through that school. I contacted my friend who had been a lifeline to me, and he said, my mother, Sandra Newman Lloyd, is preserving this building. We're working on saving it, and there's a ballot. They're going to vote, and I hope that you will be able to come before they decided to tear it down. So I fasted and prayed for the saving of the building, and then we went, and I met my friend. We did a walkthrough. We took video of what we could do, and then we came back and got into the spaces that we hadn't been able to get into before that. And that was the point where Cheryl Garn, who works for the city, guided us on that tour, got us into all the spaces, the boiler room, the locker room, the room where the rituals had happened, the kiln room. I showed them where there was a trap door. They were trying to figure out where the footings were because they were drilling down to retrofit, and they kept missing these huge blocks that separate spaces in the building where they support the building. And I knew exactly where they were. What child at 10 years old knows the crawl spaces of the building better than a building engineer? I showed him the trap door, and my friend showed up, unknown that he was showing up, and he'd been looking for the plans and found them that day. At that point in time, I had not met Michelle. Years would pass. I went through a divorce. I ended up moving to Utah. I ended up meeting Michelle. And she and I together went to Riverton and filed the first reports that they now say I never filed. These are copies that they made. They gave me back my originals, but they have copies I have requested the grammar reports and have heard nothing back. So I've got one about the rituals, each one here. Michelle and I started reporting other crimes. We met with Saratoga Springs Police because they had jurisdiction over Bluffdale. Detective Champagne was incredible. He made a statement once. He says, if I'm loyal to the truth, and if I have to arrest the prophet himself, I will. I want you to know that I've heard many stories like this. And it wasn't long after that he was dismissed and put out on patrol. The police chief, Chief Hicken, was replaced by a new chief, and the case was passed to Grant Ferry and then on to Shane Taylor. During that time, we found someone who had disappeared from a crime scene when I was a 12-year-old girl, another homicide that took place right before we moved to New Jersey, and I was able to find him. So we had all these different witnesses. We met with Mark Shurtleff, and he met with Michelle and I, and he said, well, Gina, I didn't do anything about your case in 2002. Now it's 2010, but now we have another witness. You've got Michelle. And I says, what? No, now there's 4 of us. There's my 2 sisters, the FBI files, and Michelle. That makes 4. And he says, oh, he just deer in the headlights. And then he wanted to know about what had happened in the barn. He's like, I'm gonna quiz you on what happened in the barn, your report about these people being abused by law enforcement. And when I described what had happened to me with John Llewellyn, Mark laughed. He couldn't help but laugh. He thought it was funny because I described having braces on my teeth. And so what I normally had done for this man that I didn't know was in law enforcement was some kind of oral thing. So at this point, he's like, well, that's not going to go, so I'll do something else. And when I said that to Mark, he laughed. I told the very same statement. I gave the same statement in an interview with Detective Champagne, and he cried. I had known Mark Shurtleff when we lived in San Diego. He was in our ward in Mira Mesa. I was a young women's president. He was in the bishopric. We did all kinds of activities together. I trusted that he was a faithful and righteous man. He lied to me and said that he didn't have records from the FBI. They didn't exist. Years have passed. In 2021, I met with an FBI agent in Provo, and he said, I have these records. We have them. The lies. Michelle and I filed these reports. I met with Lieutenant Lassig. At that time, I believe that Riverton law enforcement was being managed by Unified Police. Shane was still working Bluffdale, and he was the assigned detective and said, go get me copies. I need those copies from Riverton. So I went with Michelle, and Michelle was at the window first in the office, and the woman at the counter said, you have to pay. You can't get your copies. There's a fee. I don't remember what it was, maybe $5, $10, something like that per copy. And Michelle says, I don't have that kind of money. I was in school finishing my degree, living on student loans and air, didn't have a car. I'd been given a ride. And so my friend that brought me had a concealed carry license, and he was standing in that space as well. And he'd heard all kinds of stories. He'd gone back with me to take video of many places in Bluffdale, and it helped me with this friend that we had found who disappeared the night of this other homicide and had helped rebuild his life and was recording his story. And so he'd heard it a lot. And he was standing beside us, and Michelle was just like, I give up. And he was kind of saying, I think this is getting out of hand. Why are these women, there was 2 of them yelling at Michelle. And I looked at the badge or the name on the shirt. This other woman that was there, her name was Rosie Rivera. And she came up to the window when it was my turn, and I said, I need copies of my police reports that I filed. And here's my name. And, it's on the report, I put Gina Jane Pemberton and then a surname for the married name. And she says, we don't have anything for you. And if we do have anything for you, the price has gone up. It's now $25 per sheet. And I was like, well, I don't know how many reports I filed. I don't know if you're talking about back and front copies or separate price, but I don't even have enough money to put gas in my friend's car right now. And I've got to go to Murray to get copies of another report. So we left without my reports, without Michelle's reports. And at that point, I was just dusting my feet off on Riverton. I was done. We went to Murray. We walked into the police station. I walked to the counter. I'd already called ahead. I said, I'm coming in. Can you guys give me copies of reports? How much is it going to cost? And she says, oh, there's no fee. You're the witness. You're the victim witness. There's no cost. So we walked in, all three of us, to the counter. She was gracious. She had everything ready, all ready to go, handed it to me and said, I'm so sorry about what you've been through. I've read your reports. Let us know. Oh, and here's this victims reparations form. Please fill this out. This will give you at least $1,000 to start if you need to go to therapy, if you need any kind of help, if you need food or shelter or anything, you feel in danger, we got you. And it was like night and day. And we walked out of there and I said, now that's what it's supposed to be like everywhere.
So you got your sisters, you got Michelle. I mean, this is not just you saying you've seen this, and there's other people, correct?
Yes. So during the rituals, I noticed a pattern of 50% of the girls standing in the ritual circles were mainstream LDS, and the other half were coming from different fractions off, like the fractured polygamous groups. So some from
AUB
the
and
ABU, LeBaron, Kingston,
ABU.
yeah. And so Michelle heard about Tapestry. It was a group for women who were leaving polygamy. And she said, you need to join this Facebook group. So we did. And we started posting about our stories, trying to find other survivors. And out of that time frame came a woman. It was so interesting. She knew the Maycock girls. And that's who I had posted. We need to find the girls that were in the ritual that night. So Michelle and I prayed, and we've always gotten down on our knees and prayed. And this miracle happened. This girl came forward. She contacted me through Facebook and said that she'd been contacted by the group leader, or, person that supervises the group, and said, you want to contact Gina. You want to talk to her because you're healing. She knows something about your dad. So I've got that receipt, the first reach out from George Maycock's daughter, and we eventually met. So we were able to drive around, and she showed us places Michelle and I had already cataloged together, and she took us along. And this is where we got validated about the apostle that I spent years of my life arguing with my older sister about, this person that died in August of 2015, I believe, maybe it was July. But he turns out, this woman, she says, I've never been able to figure out why our church was so mixed with your church and why the rituals were like, we blended these different groups, but we didn't go to the same building for church. And she told me about this apostle from our church and named his name. So it was Boyd K. Packer. And I had argue with my sister, and I said, I'm going to doubt this. I have to doubt it. I'd never told a bishop. I'd never told anybody because I thought they're going to call me a liar. They're going to call me crazy. And she was saying, do you know this house? We pulled up to a house in Riverton, and I said, yes. And we're parked in front. The sun's gone down. It was getting dark. Sky's still light enough to see, but I said, if you walk along the side of this house, there's huge bushes, and they were more overgrown than they are, now. But if you walk around the back, there's a staircase that goes up the exterior of the building, the house, up to the top floor. In through a door, there's an attic space with bedrooms. We were trafficked there to George Maycock, who also made sure we passed off our skills. So clear back when I'm tiny to being 11, 12, we had to continually learn new skills, they called them, but it was sex acts with code words that they would whisper in our ear. And so I said, I've been there. I was there with my Uncle George one night, and your dad and Boyd K. Packer was in this house. And she said, I was there too.
Wow. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Validated. No,
Yeah,
go ahead.
we have actually recorded another survivor. We haven't released it because we don't have permission, but she recorded. She was sealed to Boyd K. Packer in
In secret.
in
Yeah.
secret and with a
Yeah.
with a ritual, and it was horrific. And so, yes, he has come up a few times, but nothing that we've ever brought up publicly like this.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to leave that in there.
Up to you, but I mean, the truth shall set you free.
There's other people reaching out to me right now on TikTok telling me that they grew up in West Jordan. They knew my uncle was a bishop. My bishop was the chaplain, so we were trafficked to the prison while he was the chaplain. And it turned out, I didn't realize it at the time, but I would be picked up at night and taken to the prison by John W. Turner, who was my bishop. And he apparently had been the warden of the prison and still had keys when he was taking me there when I was 10, 11. And we would be locked into a room. There were no bars. It was just a door. And we were locked in there, and he would be in that room, and they would bring in a couple inmates, and we would be gang raped. And my sister and I endured that a couple of times. So while my uncle was the chaplain, he'd bring us in for family home evenings on a Monday to meet with inmates that were LDS and recovering from whatever, sex crimes probably. And then later we would go into that room, and there would be a couple of these guys. No doubt they figured out how to give a message about which one of us they wanted. Just saying, like, looking back, that's what I considered my uncle to be one of the ringleaders of all of this, connected to Boyd K. Packer through the church education system. I saw him at conventions with Boyd K. Packer. They were connected to Sterling W. Sill, and that ties in with my friend who went missing. He was taken after the murder to Perry Fitzgerald's home in Draper, and Sterling W. Sill, his daughter Carolyn, was married to Perry Fitzgerald. And so my friend was then being trafficked by Perry Fitzgerald and my Uncle George, and all of these connections.
So, Gina, you have lived, an incredible life. I mean, it's been heartbreaking, to hear. But I will tell you this: as I've sat, as I've listened, my heart believes and affirms what you're saying is true. I believe you. I know this stuff is going on. You have lived a life of complete betrayal, pain, sacrifice, and I believe that God has rescued you over and over, and angels have been there so that you can testify of the darkness, of the reality, of the war that is happening now. As we wrap up, what final message do you have for those who are watching?
I believe in the power of prayer. I believe that little innocent girls standing in a circle in a dark space with a silent, secret prayer can bring hosts of heaven, the warriors of the battle. And I believe that we need to continue to pray that this darkness ends and that it's all exposed. And I believe that we need to stop lining ourselves up with political parties and churches, because I have traveled now and moved all over this country, and I have met women from the Baptist church that joined the Jehovah's Witness church and learned about rituals going on in both of those churches and have left. This is in recent years. I have watched podcasts of women in their 20s who are now suing their father. There's a woman out of New Jersey suing her father, who is the chief of police, because he took her and her sisters to rituals. This is still happening. I don't understand why, but I believe that the greatest and most powerful call to action is a call of action into ourself, to know God, to know our Savior, and to put our faith in Him, and to pray very, very particular prayers, very specific prayers, that we are guarded and protected against this evil, and that we will stand as witnesses of the truth, no matter what the consequences are that follow. And that we will not stop. We will not be silenced. We need those prayers. And we need all survivors. Whether you're brave enough to come forward and speak publicly on a podcast or not, you have got to reach out to your local law enforcement and give them reports, even if you're in your 80s and 90s. The names need to be recorded. We need validation. We need other witnesses to stand forward and to speak up now. And that's the only way we're going to stop this nightmare.
I'm so proud of you, Gina. I'm so proud of you. And I'm so proud of all the survivors who are coming forward. And I do not believe it is a coincidence. I believe God is waking up his people. I think God is shining the light on the darkness from Epstein to here in our backyard. There we are in the midst of not a political battle, but truly a battle, as Gina said, of light and dark. And it's not about our political party. It's not about gender. It's about standing against this evil, the protecting children. And you know, the scripture that just comes to mind is that we're commanded to bring the darkness to light, to shine a light on the darkness. God commands us to expose this evil, not to hide from it, not to bury our heads in the sand, not to say it can't be real, but to drag it out in the daylight. They operate in secrecy because they fear the light. They fear the truth. They fear people waking up. These people walk amongst us. They are still doing this today. Read the Hamblin victim statements. David Levitt. I mean, you start going down the line. Who is it at the top? Gordon Bowen. These people are leading in the church. Mike Levitt. These people are leading. They are leading the state. And if you watch the show we released just recently on the United Nations, Mike Levitt, who is the brother of David Levitt, who is mentioned in the victim statements, is been leading not Utah, but the country and the world into what it seems very clearly tyranny with the smart cities and the smart states and the planned pandemic. These men are not just here in our backyard, but they are leading the world into some very dark places. And we have a God-given responsibility to fight in this battle, not to sit as sheep, not to sit with our heads in the sand, and surely not to deny that the adversary lives and that this abuse is happening, or to mock these sweet, incredible survivors whom God has rescued and snatched from the flames. So to those of you who are standing, God bless you. To those of you who are on the fence, as if this is real, listen. Go back, listen to these survivors. Let your heart pray about it. But I promise you, there is a God, and he loves us, and he loves these survivors. And there is an enemy, there is an adversary, and he is raging across this country, and he is going unchecked because those in power have kept the secret combinations quiet. And it is us who must disrupt and us who must call it out. And that is why we are here in this great day, not to have our heads in the sand and not to deny the darkness and to pretend all is well in Zion. So, Gina, God bless you. I feel bad because there's so much more of her story that she could share. I hope we will have her on again, maybe her and Michelle, if that's what you guys would like to see. God bless you. You truly, you were sent for such a time as this. And truly you, Gina, have been rescued time and time again to bear your witness of the reality of not only the Savior, but of the darkness that is ravaging our children. And I pray that the people on the other end, that this will go far and wide, that people will share it. And that as much as YouTube and those in power in this state try to censor this, that the truth will be exposed and that we know God will win, and he will bring down his wrath against those. And when the earthquakes come to swallow up the blood, you will know why Utah is targeted for some of these big earthquakes. God bless you. Thank you all for what you do. Thank you for fighting in the comments, not only here, but in these other podcasts that are being paid to take this stuff down and to try to dispel the truth. We love you and we appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next show.
The summer of 2010 Michelle Nielsen and I went to Riverton City and filed police reports at the request of Sergeant Shane Taylor, who was managing our case out of Bluffdale, Utah. He indicated that we had to file police reports in each location where we had witnessed crimes like homicide and child rape. Traumatic memories are hard to document and to get the dates and the timing correct. When we turned in the reports to, I believe it was Sergeant Lassick in Riverton, he gave us a hard time. He harassed us, made fun of us, and said that there were no tunnels that were in the school. Later, when we went back and talked to him and tried to follow up, he said that he had looked in the tunnels, and I said that was impossible because there's no way he could have fit. Eventually, we went to get copies of the reports we had filed and were harassed by a sergeant there, I believe her name was. She refused to give copies to Michelle later. Her name was Rosie Rivera. And when Michelle explained that the reports were free to the victims, Rosie threatened to arrest her for harassment. And then when I asked for mine, Rosie said there were no records filed by me, and if there were, the price had gone up to $25 for a copy. We left there without any copies of our reports. This is an email dated March 5th, 2012 from Bruce Champagne of Saratoga Springs. He was the detective on the case. He writes, "Ma'am, as of this date, I have not heard from the Attorney General or anyone on his staff. I originally briefed an investigator in that office on this case and offered my case materials. The case was declined at that time." This is a letter I wrote to Detective Champagne explaining my discouragement when Mark Shurtleff learned the locations where ritual abuse had taken place and that they had been mainly in the church's properties. He said that he didn't think he could handle it and withdrew from the case and suggested that we open the case in Bluffdale. This is a photo of my friend Michelle Nielsen and I outside the doors of Sean Reyes, who was the Attorney General for the state of Utah. I believe this photo was taken when we were there in 2015, reporting the many abuses. We had been there asking for copies of the statements that I had submitted to Mark Shurtleff's office years before. There were 4 witnesses, myself, my 2 sisters, and Michelle, and yet no investigations were being made. We were told at that time that the FBI records did not exist. FBI had interviewed myself and my 2 sisters in 2002 and sent those documents to the FBI, the DA, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. These are allegations against alleged perpetrators and alleged abuse, as told to me by a man I dated in Utah between 2009 and 2015. I went on a blind date after being divorced in 2007 and returning to Utah in 2009. This man described dating other women who had told him stories of being victims in satanic rituals. One perpetrator was the son of Apostle David B. Haight. The other was a victim of the son of Vaughn J. Featherstone. This message was sent to my friend Michelle. My father was Jackson Dwayne Pemberton, employed by Salt Lake City and County to manage the data processing, the development of their software. The record keeping was done through that software for birth, death, property, crime. I give Sandra Newman Lloyd great credit in being an influencer. She founded the Riverton Arts Program, and when I was a child, first moved to the Bluffdale, Riverton area, preparing to attend school my 3rd grade year. There was a summer arts program. I took my very first official art class there and was totally motivated and excited to pursue art as a career. The school was sold to the city, I believe, in the 90s, and eventually they were going to tear it down, but Sandra's influence as the mayor changed that. At the time, I was really struggling and needed to come back and deal with memories and bring closure to myself and help others who had suffered in the school, including my sisters. I was able to return. Sandra's son helped me take the first videos, and then I returned again once more. And Cheryl Garn was so gracious. She's an employee of Riverton City to this day. She was funny and helpful. She got us the keys to get into all the spaces that we needed to see. When the school was dedicated, I should say, the Performing Arts Center was dedicated, I went to that and I was able to get this photo that's on the bottom right corner of myself standing with Cheryl Garn. And the photo above it is myself, age 10, when I was in the worst experiences in the school that I had and really, really suffered that year. My 10th year of my life was very hard. I would not have made it. I wouldn't have been able to recover as much as I have if it hadn't been for these great ladies, Sandra Newman Lloyd and Cheryl Garn. I created this map for Michelle Nielsen to share with law enforcement at Riverton City. I gave this map to her, I think in 2023. I just kind of drew it off the top of my head. This identifies the critical locations in the school, crawl spaces, tunnels, things like that. We use the crawl spaces to hide remains until they probably were moved or buried under the school. My Halloween art focuses on joy. The 3 pumpkins represent the 3 sisters and the light that shone and protected us even though we were in a very dark place. Black represents wisdom gained in this world, and white represents enlightenment and purity and protection from on high.
Most filters only strip out contaminants, and they do it poorly. Sentry removes toxins at a deeper level and adds back minerals. 75% of customers feel the difference in just 2 weeks. Install your Sentry Wellness System in just 30 minutes and enjoy water that fuels your life. Learn more at sentryh2o.com.